My name is Reynolds. I'm 32 years old, and one night changed everything. It began on a deserted highway when my husband stopped the car, shoved me out, and told me coldly, "This will teach you a lesson." He drove away without looking back, convinced I'd come crawling home by morning. But instead of breaking me, that moment unlocked something he never saw coming. In less than 24 hours, I wasn't begging to return. I was signing papers, making calls, and standing beside people powerful enough to dismantle his world piece by piece. He thought he had stripped me of control. What he didn't know was that I was about to walk into his life with more power than he could ever imagine. And when he finally saw me again, he froze. Because this time, I wasn't the woman he abandoned. I was the storm he couldn't stop. The slam of the car door still echoed in my ears when the red taillights vanished into the endless black stretch of the highway. I stood there barefoot on the rough asphalt, my coat clutched tight against the biting wind, replaying his last words over and over again. "This will teach you a lesson." His voice had been calm, deliberate, not a flash of anger, but the kind of cold certainty that made my skin crawl. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't even raised his voice. He had simply pushed me out and left me, as though I were luggage too heavy for him to carry another mile. The highway around me was silent except for the hum of passing gusts that rattled the grass and the occasional hiss of tires from cars that sped past without slowing. I lifted my arm once, twice, trying to wave one down, but none of them stopped. To them, I was invisible, another shadow at the side of the road. The longer I stood there, the more the humiliation burned deeper than the fear. He thought I would crawl back. He thought I would walk miles, knock on our door at dawn, and beg him to let me in. That's what he counted on. I turned slowly in a circle, scanning the horizon. No houses, no stores, just a thin slice of moon hanging low and the endless stretch of pavement cutting through the night. My chest tightened, not from panic, but from something harder, sharper, anger. If he believed this night would break me, he had no idea who I could be when I was forced to choose survival. It felt like hours before headlights finally slowed. A black SUV pulled to the side, its engine low and steady, too calm for a stranger cruising by. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, in a dark coat. He didn't shout across the road. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He simply walked toward me with a measured pace, as though he already knew why I was standing there. "Need a ride?" His voice was firm, controlled, the kind that made you listen before you even decided if you trusted him. I hesitated only for a breath. I had no phone, no money, no options. But something about the way he stood, shoulders squared, eyes sharp and unflinching, made me feel less stranded than I had 5 minutes ago. I nodded. The inside of his car was warm, the leather seats holding the faint scent of pine. He didn't bombard me with questions. He didn't even look at me right away. He just drove, steady, hands tight on the wheel, giving me space to breathe. When he finally spoke, it wasn't what I expected. "Your husband left you out here." It wasn't a question. I turned my face toward the window, heat crawling up my throat. "You could say that." He let the silence stretch. Then, with a tone that was more observation than curiosity, he added, "Then you're not going back." I glanced at him sharply, caught off guard by how certain he sounded. "And what makes you think that?" "Because no one who leaves their wife on a highway at midnight wants her back. And no one who survives being left like that should ever return." His words landed like a verdict, one I hadn't known I needed until he said it. By the time the city lights came into view, my pulse had steadied. He finally told me his name, Ethan. No last name yet, just Ethan. But the way he moved, the way his phone buzzed constantly on the console, screen lighting up with names I recognized from news headlines, told me enough. This was not a man who wasted time on small favors. If he had stopped for me, it was for a reason. He parked outside a high-rise building downtown, its glass surface reflecting the scattered glow of the city. I opened my mouth to ask why we were here, but he was already out of the car, holding the door for me as though it were not a question of whether I followed, but a certainty. Inside, the lobby gleamed, marble floors, a chandelier that caught the light like fractured stars. A security guard greeted him with a nod, No questions asked. The elevator ride was silent except for the soft hum of ascent, and when the doors opened, we stepped into an office that looked more like a command center than a workplace. Screens lit the walls, files stacked neatly, and a desk large enough to suggest decisions made here carried weight far beyond the city. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. "I sit." My heart pounded. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed, studying me as though he were piecing together a puzzle. "You're not the type to break down. Otherwise, you wouldn't have lasted on that road as long as you did. So tell me, if you could, what would you want right now? Revenge? Freedom? Protection?" The words slid through me like a current. No one had ever asked me that. Not in my marriage, not in my life. For years I had been an accessory, silent, nodding, playing the part. But in that moment, with his steady gaze pinning me in place, the answer rose before I could stop it. "I want to take everything he thinks I can't live without," I said quietly. I wanted to see me walk away, and no, he can't stop it. Ethan's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something close. "Good. Then you're in the right place." That night didn't end with tears on a roadside. It ended with me at a table signing papers, making calls under his direction, watching as doors I never knew existed opened effortlessly in front of me. He wasn't just helping me. He was handing me tools my husband never imagined I could touch: connections, resources, leverage. Morning sunlight cut across the kitchen tiles, sharp and clear, as Daniel leaned back in his chair with his coffee steaming in front of him. He scrolled his phone, pausing every so often to chuckle at the sports commentary or skim through work emails. The night before didn't linger in his mind. Not the argument, not the way he had stopped the car, not the look on my face when the door slammed shut. To him, it was done. He believed I would be back at some point today, exhausted, desperate, probably with a rehearsed apology. He was already rehearsing his cold response. He pictured me dragging myself up the porch steps, hair disheveled, voice cracking, and he would simply remind me why I shouldn't raise my voice to him again. Daniel liked control, the steady kind, the kind that made him feel as though every move had been calculated and executed flawlessly. In his head, leaving me on that highway was brilliant. It would break me without leaving a mark anyone could see. He could still look respectable in front of friends and family, still be the charming husband at gatherings. Behind closed doors, though, he carried the satisfaction of knowing he had put me back in my place. He glanced at the clock, checked his messages, and frowned when none were for me. His brows tightened slightly, then relaxed again as he shook off the thought. I would cave. I always did. Meanwhile, the city was already awake with noise and traffic, and I was nowhere near crawling back to him. I was seated at a long oak conference table in a high-rise with walls of glass overlooking downtown. Ethan had introduced me to two people that morning, both of them dressed sharply, speaking with the ease of professionals used to being in command. One was an attorney who specialized in corporate and personal settlements. The other, a financial strategist who handled accounts for clients whose names carried weight in politics and business. They didn't treat me like a stranded woman pulled off a highway. They treated me as if I had already stepped into a role of importance. Paperwork spread out in front of me, contracts and agreements stacked in neat piles, ready for signatures. Ethan didn't hover, didn't pressure, but every so often he would nod toward a line or a clause, pointing out details I would have missed on my own. "This isn't about survival anymore," he told me, his voice steady but edged with purpose. "It's about leverage. You've been treated like you're powerless, but that ends now. From this point forward, he answers to you." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name on the first document, then the next. Each signature wasn't just ink on paper. It was a blade carving me out of the corner Daniel thought I belonged in. By midday, the structure of my life had shifted completely. Accounts that had always been under his name alone were now in review. Legal measures were being drafted. The house he sat in so comfortably that morning was no longer untouchable. Ethan's connections cut through obstacles with surgical precision, the kind of access Daniel never imagined I would have. And yet, none of it was rushed. Everything was planned, deliberate. Ethan understood the psychology of men like Daniel. Breaking them wasn't about a loud confrontation. It was about pulling the ground out from beneath them so slowly they didn't realize it until they were already falling. By the afternoon, I had clothes delivered, a phone in my hand, and a schedule outlined for the next 24 hours. No scrambling, no bagging, no explanations. Just forward motion. While I sat in that room building a future, Daniel was sitting in his office at work, bragging. He leaned across his desk to a colleague, smirking as he told a story stripped of details but rich with implication. "You have to know how to handle a woman when she gets out of line," he said, lowering his voice as though sharing an insider tip. "Sometimes, you remind them who's really in charge." His colleague laughed, not asking questions, not wanting to know more. That suited Daniel perfectly, but his arrogance carried him blindly into the trap I hadn't even finished setting. By late afternoon, his phone buzzed with a notification he didn't expect. A flagged transaction. An account under review. He scowled, annoyed, muttering something about the bank's incompetence. He tapped furiously, only to find more errors popping up, balances frozen. His jaw tightened. He called the bank. They gave him rehearsed answers, polite but firm. The matter was being looked into. By evening, his frustration had boiled into something he couldn't shake. He paced through the living room, trying to calculate what could have triggered it. He thought of me briefly, but dismissed the idea. I was helpless. I didn't have access to his files. I wouldn't even know where to begin. To him, I was incapable of even imagining such moves. But as he tossed his phone onto the couch and poured himself another drink, I was seated across from Ethan in a private dining room, papers spread between us, voices low. This wasn't a chance rescue anymore. This was a partnership, a shift of power, and the more we talked, the clearer it became that Ethan wasn't just helping me because of some fleeting moment of pity. He had his reasons, and they intertwined neatly with my need for control. "You understand what happens when he sees you tomorrow," Ethan said, setting his glass down. "It's not just about shock. It's about making sure he knows you can't be undone. Once you walk through that door, you never step back." I nodded, my chest tightening not with fear but with anticipation. That's exactly what I want. The night stretched ahead with preparations. Calls were made, documents finalized. Names I had only ever seen in headlines became contacts in my phone. Every step pulled me farther from the woman who had stood alone on the side of the road, shivering, abandoned. That version of me was gone. The morning began with a silence that felt deceptive, like the pause before a storm breaks. I was already dressed in a tailored suit chosen for sharp lines. Nothing soft, nothing uncertain. The reflection staring back at me in the mirror wasn't the woman he thought he left broken. She carried no traces of the highway. She carried strategy. Every piece of me had been put together with intent. Hair pinned neatly, steady eyes, a posture that belonged in rooms where decisions shaped futures. Ethan arrived without a word, phone in hand, scanning updates as he entered. His expression confirmed what I already knew. Everything was ready. The paperwork was filed, the accounts locked, the legal wheels turning. Daniel had been boxed in completely, without even realizing it. "You walk in, you don't explain," Ethan said plainly. "You let the silence speak first. That's what will crush him. He'll look at you and understand before a word is said." I nodded once. There was no hesitation left in me. By mid-morning, the building where Daniel conducted his business was alive with noise. Assistants rushing across polished floors, phones ringing nonstop, voices rising behind office doors. I had walked through those halls before, always trailing behind him, playing the role of the silent wife. But today, when I entered through the wide glass doors, heads turned. Not because I was his wife, but because of the company I arrived with. Ethan walked at my side, and the recognition in the staff's eyes was instant. They whispered, exchanged looks, but no one stopped us. The receptionist's smile faltered when she tried to greet me, words catching when she noticed the files I carried. Ethan's simple nod made her lower her eyes. We didn't wait for permission to move forward. Daniel was in his office, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was louder than usual, frustration leaking through as he snapped at whoever was on the line. "What do you mean it's restricted? That's my account." His tone was sharp, biting. He didn't hear the door open at first. When his gaze finally lifted, the sight of me standing there froze him mid-sentence. The blood drained from his face, his mouth slightly open, disbelief etching itself across his features. His phone slipped from his ear as silence swallowed the room. "You," he said finally, his voice cracking under the weight of shock. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I placed the folder on his desk with deliberate calm. Inside were the documents finalized the night before, court orders, transfers, filings. He flipped them open, his hands shaking slightly as he scanned the pages. His disbelief shifted into something uglier. Panic. This isn't possible," he stammered. "You wouldn't even know how to." His eyes darted between me and Ethan, and the realization hit him. "You had help." I leaned forward, my tone even controlled. "No, I had options you never thought I would find. That's the difference." His hand raked through his hair as he tried to piece together an argument, but every word fell flat. For years, he had carried himself with certainty, convinced that control belonged only to him. Now, standing in his own office with his world unraveling, the weight of what he had done finally pressed down on him. "You're making a mistake," he tried again, softer now, almost pleading. "This is just anger. We can fix this. Come home. We'll talk." The irony of his words almost made me laugh. Home. The same home where he believed abandoning me on a highway was discipline. The same home he assumed I would crawl back to in shame. That home was no longer his to control. "I'm not coming back," I said, my voice steady, final. "You left me with nothing, and in doing that, you gave me everything. The power you tried to keep for yourself is mine now. And the difference between us is simple. You thought betrayal was strength. I know it's weakness." He opened his mouth, but no words came. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Ethan spoke then, his tone sharp as steel. "You should understand the reality, Daniel. You won't win this. The papers are signed, the courts are moving, and every contact you relied on has been warned to step away. She's not under your control anymore. You're standing on nothing." Daniel sank slowly into his chair, the weight of it all pressing down visibly. His jaw tightened as his eyes flicked toward me again, but the arrogance was gone. What replaced it was fear, a fear he would never admit aloud, but one he couldn't hide from me now. I gathered the last set of documents from his desk and turned toward the door. Before leaving, I paused, looking at him one final time. "You taught me a lesson, just not the one you wanted. You showed me how dangerous it is to trust someone who believes silence equals weakness. Now you'll live with the consequences." When I walked out, I didn't look back. The staff who once ignored me lowered their eyes as I passed, the sound of my heels steady against the polished floor. Outside, the city buzzed with life, unaware of the storm that had just broken inside that office. By noon, the legal filings were public. His reputation, carefully curated for years, began to unravel. Business partners withdrew. Banks closed their doors. And everywhere he turned, the image of me standing in his office, calm, untouchable, followed him like a shadow he couldn't shake. That night, I stood on the balcony of Ethan's high-rise, the city stretched out beneath me, lights flickering like constellations brought down to earth. The air was cool, steady, carrying no trace of the fear that once clung to me. For the first time, there was no weight pressing down on my chest. Daniel had thought leaving me on a dark highway was control. What he didn't understand was that it was a door. He shoved me through it, without realizing it led to a world where he could never follow.